Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here with my review for Ahsoka Part 7, Dreams and Madness. This is a 420 review. Also, this review will basically be up the same time as my last episode, so if you guys could check that out, I would greatly appreciate it. I coughed quite a bit in that because I was sick, which is also why I'm not uploading that until the same day as this one. I'm just way behind on it because I was sick all last week, so that was unfortunate. But back to reviewing, especially before the final episode of this season. I'm excited. Got some notes again because there are a couple of things to talk about for sure, especially going into the season finale. There's some theories to be discussed. Also, of course, this is a 420 review, back on track as far as Ahsoka is concerned. But right off at the top, 3PO, wow, 3PO, cool cameo. I definitely noticed, like, when it was happening, I was like, man, we would have had Carrie Fisher if she was still alive. They would have, maybe it would have just been a hologram because obviously it's still only like 5 years after Return of the Jedi. She's not going to be her actual age. So maybe it would have been a hologram and they, like blue de-aging or, whatever. They could have done like the little mini disc deal. But she definitely, like, they definitely would have got her at least to do the voice, and that would have been really cool. But we did get 3PO, and that was a really cool reference. Hera, of course, gets saved. Chopper gets mad because the one dude that everybody hates, which we can hate him even more in this episode, he's like, we can't accept this from like some random droid. And of course, Chopper doing this thing, he was mad. Saw a great tweet where somebody was like, he's on trial for his numerous crimes. That's a hilarious tweet. For anyone who's not familiar with Rebels, like, it is like almost canon that Chopper has killed, like, was it like 15,000 people, 150,000 people, something crazy. Like, he's killed like a ridiculous amount of people. He literally blew up like an entire Star Destroyer at some point. And that dude's an a-hole. I was watching something recently and it was like, Ezra was literally hanging off of a ledge and could have fallen, and Chopper rolled over his fingers as he's hanging off of a ledge. Like, he just rolled over his fingers, and it's just like, dang. I haven't watched the show in a minute, but Chopper's effed up. But I love Chopper. Like, he's really funny. But we got 3PO. That was super cool. Mon Mothma, of course, Leia reference. So that was really nice. And then, of course, we kick off into the main part of the episode. And once again, another cameo. We have a returning cameo this time, of course, with Anakin Skywalker. We also get a General Grievous reference, which is pretty neat. And it was funny watching this episode. I was like, man, everyone, most people, I would assume, everyone knows Grievous, especially if you watch the movies, episode 3. But Grievous is like huge in Clone Wars. Like, obviously he was introduced in 3, but Clone Wars was like, holy crap, especially if you go with the Genndy Tartakovsky, like the 2D Clone Wars, when I think technically that came out before episode 3. So he did premiere before episode 3. And he was wild in that. He was nothing in live action, but he was glorious in 2 dimensions. Like, he was killing everybody. He was super cool. And that just didn't translate afterwards. He was cool in Clone Wars, but I'll be honest, I barely remember a single thing from Clone Wars, like the 3D version, as far as Grievous is concerned. I barely remember a single thing about him in that. But when it comes to the 2D thing, I think of like his first episode introduction, and it's like, General Grievous was the coolest thing in the world. And oddly enough, him coughing in the episode 3 film was based off of the 2D version fight of him and Mace Windu, where he like squeezes his heart basically. And they kept that part canon, and obviously they erased basically everything else from the 2D version because there's some stuff that's different there. But that was super cool. I was like, okay, General Grievous. And then right after that, Asajj Ventress live action reference. And that is crazy. And I mentioned this before, but when it comes to Clone Wars, and when they were doing the whole Clone Wars Rebels flashback episode, I was like, okay, when it comes to Clone Wars, Anakin and Obi-Wan are in like their own stratosphere. Like, those are characters from the original film, even though they said Anakin like one time in the first movie. Those are movie characters. They already exist. That's just a whole thing. Clone Wars is Ahsoka and Rex. That is where they were born. And then on the villain side of that, Asajj Ventress, who was also introduced in the 2D version as well. But Asajj Ventress, Clone Wars. And then the other character, if we're going, 2 heroes, 2 villains, the most badass bounty hunter in the galaxy, Cad Bane. I hope he's not actually dead. I was like, man, if he's officially dead, Book of Boba Fett is the worst thing that ever happened to me in Star Wars. But Cad Bane, I love Cad Bane. He's the coolest thing in the world. But Asajj Ventress is the other main villain character I think of whenever I think of Clone Wars. So those are like my 2 villains and my 2 heroes. So it was great to have her reference. That was definitely cool. The next one would be like Savage Opress would have to get randomly referenced, which means they would have to reference Darth Maul if they did that, which perfectly fine with that. But Asajj got reference, and I was super happy with that. Then we skip down to the planet. And this is where we get into a couple of interesting things, because the finale has to do a lot. I like this episode, but this was definitely the episode that was like the most important thing with this was we get the characters all together for the finale. And also for anyone who has not had any familiarity with Thrawn, here's the episode where you're like, oh, that's why he's like that. That's why he's such a cool character. That's why other nerds, such as myself, are like, man, I can't wait for Thrawn to do something cool because Thrawn is super cool. This was the episode. It was a small hint, and I think they did that on purpose because, and I'll skip to the end and I'll go back and forth here, but Thrawn got a victory. He got, that's what he does. He got a victory, but this was a light victory. We've seen dark victories, especially if you watch Rebels or if you read the old books and stuff. We've seen dark victories when it comes to Thrawn. This was a light victory. He got what he wanted, but all he had to do was just be like, all right, just stall it for a minute. That was it. No big deal. Granted, when he found out Anakin was Ahsoka's master, it was like, oh damn, we screwed. So, like he had to switch some things up there, but we got to see that happen because you could, even if you didn't know, you could tell like when he knew who Anakin was, it was like, you could just see the fear where it was like, let me contemplate how not to die right now. So I think anyone could capture that when that moment happened. Like I think anyone could see that whether you knew Rebels or not, or if you know the comic stuff or not, because that leads into one of the questions. Are they going to make it where he knows Anakin was Darth Vader? Because that's what it is in like the comics and books and stuff. He already knew that. He's one of the few people that's insanely high up when it came to the Empire when it existed, and he knew who he was. So I'm curious if he'll use that against Ahsoka, because I still think that at some point they have to come across each other. So I'm curious if he'll try to use that on Ahsoka. And also, that's something that they've like half hidden within the show, where it's come up a couple times. It's like, oh yeah, my master. No one knows. Obviously, even if he said it, it would be like, Anakin Skywalker. He'd have to straight up be like, I know Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader, but nobody knows that in this show. Like the only person that knows is Hu Yang. Everybody else is just like, oh, you had a master and that was it. People do not know who Ahsoka's master is, and I still feel like they can use that as like just a crazy story moment to just drop on everybody and be like, hold on, you never once said that in your life that this dude was this dude. Because I don't think any of them knew that. Even when it came to the Rebels characters, when that was like a whole part of her story, I don't think Ezra still figured any of that stuff out. It was just like, holy crap, she's fighting Darth Vader. I don't think they really knew the whole story there. So I'm curious what they'll do with that, because they could make that canon, and I think that would be a great story moment, but it could just not be a thing, and he just knows Anakin as the commander just being insanely powerful because that's what he was. But I think he knows both sides of Anakin Skywalker, so I hope that they drop that, because nobody else, I mean, Balin even slightly referenced it, but he has no reason to randomly say that to Sabine. But I feel like if Thrawn wanted to throw characters off, he's the perfect character to do that and be like, does she know who your master is? Because he'll be cornered. He can't fight anybody with a lightsaber. He's a fighter, but that was also like 15 years ago when he was a fighter, and he can't fight a Jedi, plain and simple. But he could just drop a couple words and be like, does she know your master helped rule rule the galaxy? So they could drop that in there. I don't know if that's going to be like his last ditch effort to be like, is she gonna chop my head off? Anakin Skywalker is her master became Darth Vader. I don't know if he'll do that, but I feel like they could. And that could kind of propel some stuff going into season 2, or whatever ends up happening, movie, all this different stuff. But I thought that was interesting, so we'll see what happens with that. And then right next to that is Sabine. They need to have a conversation with her, because she got away in this episode because it ended up becoming the action episode. So they skipped over a lot of like the dialogue that needs to happen with her character, because they kept it simple, where she was just like, oh man, things are complicated. It's like, okay, so is Ahsoka coming? Like, it's complicated. They got to skip over all of that because Balin and Shin showed up, and then it became an action episode towards the end. But there's a whole conversation that Ahsoka has to have with Sabine, where it's like, hey, what the F? Because her whole story is how growing up, she joined the Empire, got a buttload of Mandalorians killed, and she was basically exiled from her people because everybody's like, hey, you built this super weapon that kills us all. So that's her story. She can't do that twice, where especially on an even grander scale, where it was like, you let this dude out and it was for the whole galaxy. Like, they're gonna have to touch on that. And I feel like what they can do, because there's quite a few things they sort of hinted at, which they could save for season 2, but some stuff I feel needs to be talked about. Even though both characters are kind of, Ahsoka and Sabine are kind of where they need to be together, I think they need to have that final conversation about what happened with Sabine's parents, because Balin referenced it, where it was like, oh, your parents died because your master didn't trust you enough and stuff like that. I feel like we need to have that conversation, because that will fuel her answer and it being believable enough to be like, this is why she did something, even after what she already did with her people, the Mandalorians. This is why she went so crazy to do it against pretty much the entire galaxy, because everyone was dead. And however long it's been since she, stopped training with Ahsoka, her family died from that moment. And it's just been like her kind of just doing things, but still, kind of being lost. And they're both a little bit back. She's ready to train, and Ahsoka's ready to teach, but they need to have that first actual moment. Like they had their resolution where it's like, oh, you're not dead. Yeah, you're not dead. They haven't had the conversation yet. They're both where they need to be, but there's one conversation they need to have first. And I think they're going to do that in the finale. And I really hope they do, because they need to have that resolution, because Ahsoka's still going to be upset. And that has to lead into what Sabine is still upset about. Because I thought they were going to reference that in the last episode. And I watched a couple of people do reactions, and I saw some people mention that too, where when she yelled at the dog and was like, I knew you'd betray me. I thought that was going to be her a scene where she expresses, like, it was just going to be their way of her expressing it, where she couldn't have the chance to talk to Ahsoka because she thought she was dead. I thought that's what they were going to do, and then that's not what happened. She just yelled at the dog and it was like, all right, come on. But I thought that's what they were going to tease, where she was going to have that outburst and feeling betrayed by what Ahsoka did by not trusting her, but they didn't. But now they can do that because they're both alive. They're both, one's ready to learn, one is officially ready to teach. They just need to have that one conversation so they can, be fully whole again. And so they have to do that. And during that sequence, they have to talk about Jason, because Sabine did not tell Ezra about Jason, which means that she knew that, or at least she fully thought, we're probably going to die in this galaxy. I'm not going to tell him about Kanan having a son. He basically has like, a nephew. So it's like, I thought that was interesting, and that's going to lead to another conversation where it was like, oh, because he went through, it was like, oh, Zeb's doing this and Hera's doing that. He didn't mention Hera being a mother, didn't mention Kanan having a son, which means she was like, you know what? They'll probably never ever meet. That was Sabine's plan. It was like, I made it to him. I don't think we'll ever get home. So I'm not going to mention Jason. Like, that's going to be a conversation, and I'm very excited for that because it could be good. It could easily be passed over. They could do like a, silly, funny thing. Ezra has his jokes, but I think with both of them being there, it might balance out. It rhymes, I guess. But Ahsoka is still going to be a little bit upset. She might be jokey. She's definitely jokier in this episode, which I really liked. Getting, that classic Ahsoka back. And even in this episode, we kind of got classic Sabine as well, because they both kind of got what they need. Like, she found Ezra. Ahsoka kind of died. She saw her master. She got her friend back. So they still need to have that conversation, and that's probably going to lead to Ezra being like, well, dang, you really thought we were dying because you didn't even talk about, Jason existing. So I thought that was interesting because, when you do a full recap, typically the most important thing is like, there's another human-ish character, existing. But nothing at all. It was just like, oh, piloting and doing this. Nothing about the kid. So I thought that was fascinating because it was like, that's not something you skip over. So I thought that was really cool. So we'll see about that. We'll see what they do, as far as the Thrawn stuff, as far as Sabine. They need to have that conversation, like, in general. Because it's two sides of the same coin. It's like they have to talk to each other, Ahsoka and Sabine has to be confronted about her making that decision. And it's like, hey, as your master, I gotta say what the fuck. It just has to happen. So I think we're definitely gonna have that, and it could lead to like quite a few things. Like, I really, really do hope that they talk about the exact thing. And we might not get like a flashback or anything, but I really want to get that story. I want to know what was the exact thing that she didn't trust Sabine to do. And they can easily do that going into the final battle, where it's like, hey, I feel like we need to have this random, conversation at the last minute right before the final thing happens, so we both go in this clean. So they could easily pull it off. It could be cliche, but as long as I get the answer, I don't think I'm going to care. I want to know what happened exactly that tore them apart, because it was a pretty big deal. And that could be the justification. It was her losing her family, especially me knowing what I know from Rebels. It has to be really well justified because of the other stuff I know from Rebels about her destroying all their people. But they could totally do it. Her losing her family and just being kind of stuck on that and being like, Ezra's, and a lot of people do mention Hera being there, and obviously Zeb as well, where it's like, Balin being like, Ezra's like the only family that you have. I think it's just the fact that Ezra's an orphan. And I think that was the thing. They were always closest in age, so they were always a bit closer. And now she has an even deeper connection to Ezra, because now she gets what it's like to not have a biological family. So like, they were always a little bit closer, as far as like the groups are concerned. But I think that was just a deeper connection, like her losing that, and then she lost her family and lost Ahsoka at the exact same time. So it was just like, dang, Hera's off being a mom, she's doing her thing as a general as well, and Zeb's off piloting and stuff, and Sabine really was the one that was kind of just like, all right, I'm gonna stay here on Lothal. Everybody else is gone. She's back at home at Ezra's spot. Like, she's kind of been stuck on Ezra for a little minute. So like parts of it are already justified that she's kind of just had like this crazy drive to be trapped just thinking about getting Ezra back. But they still need to have that conversation, and I think it could lead to us getting a full explanation of what Ahsoka did to fell Sabine back in the day that got her family killed. So I hope that we get that. Also, this is something super random. Speaking of like Mandalorians dying and all that stuff, they do reference the fact that what happened in the Mandalorian season 3 is past tense, because that was the big thing everybody was talking about, like, especially when the purgle were going through. It was like, oh, excuse me, what if this scene connects to the last scene we saw when, I think it was in the last season of Mandalorian, when Grogu saw the purgle and he was like reaching up. It was like, oh, what if those were those two scenes? And as they were going through hyperspace, they were going I guess intragalactic. No, intro would be, so it was intergalactic. They went from one galaxy to the other. Turns out that's not the case. That was just a tease for Ahsoka basically having the purgle. But they do reference the fact that all of that in Mandalorian season 3 is not concurrent. Maybe it was at some point, in the early parts of this show, but it is not concurrent. Like that, they made that official in this. I never heard that. Everyone else said it though, but I was like, I just assumed all the shows were one after the other, but everybody kept being like, they're concurrent. So I was like, okay, I mean, that doesn't make much sense to me personally. But this one kind of confirms, like, no, they are not concurrent. What happened on Mandalore is, past tense. So I was like, all right, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. It doesn't really do kind of much of anything at all. But it's like, okay, if anyone questions why Sabine wasn't on her home planet, not the greatest attachment, especially after losing your family. Like, why go back? So, they might talk about that. I feel like they need to. What broke them apart? That can be the conversation that officially brings them together. So I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to more stuff, with Thrawn and everything. And then naturally, there's a bunch of other stuff, fighting and things with the episode, but more theories. Because what the F is Baylan doing? Like, who knows? Whatever he's searching for, I'm excited to see. And that was another reason that I was actually really happy about this episode, because this was the one where they did all the fight sequences that I thought they were going to do. We got Ahsoka versus Baylan. We kind of like halfway got Shin versus Sabine, but they split that up with Ezra fighting Shin for a little bit. So it was like, okay, I'll take that trade-off, because he's going like no lightsaber, all force. That was pretty cool. I wish it looked a bit cooler. Action wise, it was like, I just wish we got to see go like a little bit harder, especially considering like his whole training in 10 years of the Force. And I know some people have been upset that he didn't take the lightsaber, but I think it makes way more sense that he wouldn't. I know it, unfortunately, once again, the sequels, man, they do what they do, but unfortunately, it can easily be tied to that. Like, oh, here's a character that's always been a Jedi. Even the character in the show is like, hey, got your lightsaber for you, and he doesn't want his lightsaber. I would say that this was a much cooler representation of a character not taking their old lightsaber back, where he's like, I'm not gonna not fight, but it's been like a decade. I'm not as good with that. I'm gonna just use the Force. And it was super cool that he did it. I thought that was actually pretty sweet. But like I said, I do wish it looked cooler action wise, but it was fun to see. It was definitely a great fight. I liked everything that they did with that. But story wise, that was all the action. We got the fights. Every fight I thought we were gonna have was gonna be half here, half finale. All the fights were here, which means story wise, we've done the action. I'm sure there's going to be more action. I don't think that we're going to get a season finale and somehow no lightsabers clash. Somebody's going to fight somebody. But the big battles that I was anticipating, they already happened, which means we have however many minutes. I hope it's for sure over an hour for the finale. I would love it if they were just like, here's a full Star Wars movie and it's 3 hours long. It won't be, but someday they're going to do that, right? Like at some point, they're just going to be like, surprise, the last episode's 2 hours long. I'm surprised they haven't done, like, nobody's just been like, hey, what if we just surprise everybody with a crazy long finale? I don't know why that doesn't happen in streaming. It should. That was one of my favorite things when it came to TV. It was just like 2 hour season finale. That's one of the greatest experiences of all time. It's a 2 hour season finale. They can do that in streaming. Just surprise us. I'm just saying somebody should do that, because I always love that one on TV. But Baylan's search, or whatever is calling him, in whatever is going to end up being, is going to be such a huge focus in the next episode, because they've already set up the story beats. They did all the action in this to establish the stories for the actual finale. It doesn't end in like a crazy, of course, leading up to the season finale. It's not one of those like exciting endings, because admittedly they go through the battle and stuff, they tease things, but it's not like, holy crap, is someone gonna live or die based on this ending that happened. It feels like it's actually a resolution, and then almost in a sense kind of kills its place as the penultimate episode of a season, because that's like, penultimate episodes are always meant to be the to be continued thing, and this was definitely like, no, we solved it. Like, you know, they introduced the story beats, of course, but it feels super definitive where it's like, all right, it's said and done. We have our victory against Thrawn. Well, they don't technically. Thrawn did win, and it's going to be the dark victory in the season finale for sure. Somebody's not making it, but they did the light, you know, the light victory, and that could definitely probably sour people a little bit, especially if you don't know Thrawn. It'd be like, oh, you know, like tactician, sure, but no, it should be good. So I'm looking forward to that. But story wise, I'm very excited to see, and hopefully, once again, if it's a long enough episode, we get a decent amount of time on, because it has to be a big reveal. They've been building it up. Technically, they built it up since the beginning, because they kind of teased like, oh, there's something different about this dude. Like, Ahsoka is obviously a great Jedi. He's a great Jedi, if you want to classify it that way. She is more on the light side, he's more on the dark side, but he has been trained as a Jedi. Like, he fell further than she did, and that was kind of her whole temptation. But he fell further than she did, but he's still not full dark side or anything like that. He still makes his Padawan wear a Padawan braid, you know, stuff like that. And his whole thing has been like, hey, I'm an honorable guy. Like, we could have killed Sabine, but I was like, hey, we'll take you to Ezra, no big deal. And then it was like, all right, we'll take her to Ezra, or, you know, help her find Ezra. Then we'll kill them both. And then they have this episode, and it's like, oh man, I'm fighting Ahsoka. Oh man, she got away. I guess Shin has to die. And then he leaves, and it's like, okay, that's them like chipping away at the honor that he has, because he's been called to this planet apparently, which technically speaking they introduced in the last episode. Because before that it was just like, well, what's their story? Like, we knew something was there, because it was like they're this weird evil sect of like gray Jedi, and like, but you know, he still has a Padawan, she has to wear the braid, you know, that sort of stuff. So it's like, there's something going on here. Like, there's something mysterious. Like, it was clear that it was there, because it was like just the styling and everything was like, something is there. And then they get to this planet, and oddly enough, with this episode being called Dreams and Madness, it does not touch on it at all. I thought for sure, I was like, oh, Dreams and Madness, this is going to be the episode where we get all the crazy stories that he was referencing in the last episode, because it was like, oh, they're just stories of power and beings and this and that. And then it was like Dreams and Madness, and I was like, oh, this is going to be real crazy. It's going to be like one of those Rebels episodes where they go into a Jedi temple or something, which he still could do, because those are some wild episodes. It gets like some live action Jedi temple action where it's visions and all sorts of wild stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if Dave Filoni pulled that one off for the finale, but I'm very excited to see what they do with it, because I think they're going to spend a lot of time on it, because we got at least a decent chunk of action. Because the last episode didn't have a lot of action, built up a bunch of story stuff. This episode was like, all right, we're leading into the finale, sure, but we're going to use the action to drive us into the finale. But it feels very resolved. Like, there's threads out there, because it's like, well, what's Baylan searching for? What's Shin gonna think? Because Baylan was like, all right, you know, that's your path, I'm gonna go off and do this thing. And she's gonna be like, hey, I know you fought Ahsoka. Like, why'd you leave? Like, why didn't you, like, why, help me, please? So they're gonna have that conversation. You know, another talk that needs to be had between master and apprentice. And I would imagine if they do it, Shin is just gonna go full dark side. I think everyone kind of figured that, was like, okay, you know, Baylan. I always thought like Baylan's gonna die off, but we'll have to wait and see, you know, what ends up happening with that. But I always was like, yeah, he's definitely gonna be the character that we all appreciate. He's gonna have like kind of a Darth Maul effect a little bit, where it's like, all right, he comes in, everybody appreciates him, but it's his one appearance. That's it. Like, his story beginning, middle, end, as far as we're concerned, in Ahsoka. Then he's gone, and then Shin takes over as like the main lightsaber wielding villain. And I still think that could be possible, especially if they do something crazy where whatever he finds ends up killing him, or it ends up being that big conversation between him and Shin, and she doesn't want to follow it, but he feels like he has to, and maybe they fight over that. Maybe if he becomes powerful, Ahsoka's like, hey, we got to stop him from becoming powerful, whatever, you know, this new thing is going to be. So there's a lot of questions there. They definitely have the threads going into the finale that I'm excited for. And of course, you know, what's going to happen with them trying to get back to Thrawn's ship. Is he actually going to escape, and then they're left in this new galaxy? Like, that could really happen. He could actually just flat out escape, and then the characters have to find their way back to the other galaxy later. Like, it's totally possible that actually ends up being the finale, where the characters like get split up between galaxies, and somebody doesn't actually have a way back home. So who knows what could really happen there, but the resolution of it all despite it just being definitely feeling like, you know, kind of the action episode, got the characters back together, and it dropped really the two, I'd say the most important thread as far as I'm concerned is like what, you know, the continuing to tease what in the world is Baylan looking for? Who is calling to him? What is calling to him? Is it a holocron? Like there's so many questions. Like it could be something that's old, it could be something brand new, it could be a character that's old, it could be a character that's brand new. There are like a billion effing options when it comes to like weird Star Wars stuff that can be pulled out, like especially with this. Like we got Dave Filoni doing it, and we basically got the world between worlds. It wasn't like really that, but visually that was meant to be the representation for sure. So who knows? He could pull anything out. He could just be like, here's this old thing from Star Wars Legends. Here's a thing from Rebels. Here's the thing that kind of connects to like anything could happen because it's Star Wars. Like there are so many wild Star Wars things that do not get touched on. And I would love it if they start bringing more of that live action. Like specifically, I mean, they're already doing it with the Night Sisters, and shout out to the, you know, the Jedi games, because Survivor, Fallen Order and Survivor really touch on, you know, Dathomir and all that stuff. And this introduced the fact that Dathomir isn't the home planet of the Night Sisters. They came from a whole other galaxy. Like he's bringing in wild stuff. He's making new, you know, connections to old stuff, but like new versions of it all, or adding to the lore of it all. And it's just like, all right, he could pull on anything. Like what? Like it's not gonna happen. But it was just like Darth Revan. There it is. Boom. Like it wouldn't even make sense. But it was just like, yeah, I guess. I don't know. It's Star Wars. Anything could pop out in this season finale. I have no real expectations. I don't know what to even think. I've been hearing, was Aboleth been rolling around. I think I saw a video on that, which actually seemed kind of legit based off what I saw. I was like, well, that actually didn't seem too far off. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But I'm excited. I'm very excited. We got a bunch of action. I think it's going to be just like the last episode. It was like not so much action, buttload of story, bunch of action, not so much story. It was just drive the characters from point A to point B, and that was it, leading to the finale. And then finale, maybe not as much action, but a ridiculous amount of story. And I think it'll make it worth it in context of being like, okay, this could have felt like a filler episode, but it wasn't, because of the fact that, I mean, this is one of those episodes I could definitely see people feeling that way about it, just because of the fact that the last one was so lore heavy. It was like, okay, you know, technically speaking, that may have been a little bit less as far as like story impact. It was more for like intriguing moments, but realistically it was kind of the same. It was still kind of a point A to point B. It was just more questions happening, or more questions being answered, I should say. And in this one, not a lot of questions were really answered, even from characters themselves, like Ezra not getting the answers that he really wanted. So we have to wait for that during the finale. So I think we're gonna get a lot of what we kind of hope to see in this that was replaced with action. I think we're gonna get all those answers in the finale, and it'll just be like a crazy exposition, probably done in a really good way, lore dump, plus the reveal of whatever the F is going on with Baylan, the progression of Shin's story from season 1 to season 2, because that's definitely going to be done in this. Either she kills him or he dies and she's lost, so she just sticks with the bad guys because that's the closest thing to an ally she has. She ran away from Ahsoka, which kind of makes sense. So we'll see what happens there, but the seeds are planted, but definitely a definitive like ending for this episode, because they're like, oh, you know, we survived, and Thrawn was also like, but I won. Yeah, which he does. Easy win, because it was just take some time. If he has to take a life though, he's good at that. So we'll see what happens in the next episode. But to get back to the actual episode itself, not all the theory stuff, we'll love to know your thoughts on that. And of course, I'll ask you guys that again at the end of this video, but all theory stuff for the finale, please let me know all your thoughts and everything about that for sure. Baylan's search, going through, thought that was super cool. Impatience for victory will guarantee defeat. Thought that was a great line, so that was pretty nice. Oh, Hu Yang dropping off Ahsoka, I thought that was funny, where it's like, you know, remember what happened last time? It was like, oh, you missing the drop. I was like, and didn't I feel sorry? It's like, no, you didn't. I thought that was really funny. So that was another thing that I really loved about the action for this episode, was the coordination between the units, where it's like, okay, here's Ezra and Sabine, they're doing their thing, Ahsoka and Hu Yang are together, and then she gets dropped off, she has her fight with Baylan, he's flying around, but then he circles back to help her out with her fight so that she can go help out Ahsoka, help out with Ezra and Sabine. And I was like, that's really cool, like the team units working together to like get basically get all the pieces together. So thought that was really cool. Of course, the battle itself I thought was definitely fun. I like the fact that they showed Ahsoka, you know, especially with this transition into having her new costume and everything. Well, excuse me. I love the fact that when she dropped down, she didn't use single bladed. She went back. It was kind of her classic thing. It was like, no, I'm me. I'm back to normal. 2 lightsabers. I can take you out like this. So I was like, that's really cool. It's back to her actual style. So I thought that was pretty neat. The action I thought was decent. I feel like they could be moving faster, and part of it is like, okay, it feels more samurai-esque. And then there's some moments like in this where when they were fighting, I was like, it's not really like the samurai style. Like they're moving faster and it feels closer to the prequels, but they're not moving fast enough for me to like really get full in. Like some of the shots, it just felt like a little bit too slow. But overall, I'd say that, the action was decent, lightsaber wise, between Ahsoka and Baylan. So we had all that, and then we have Ezra with no lightsaber, and that I thought was pretty cool. I was like, all right, he didn't want to take his lightsaber back. I'm sure that's gonna get a connection. The sequels, they do what they do, and it's hard not to have the connections. For some people, it matters more than others. For me personally, it's way better than what they did with Luke. Personally speaking, of course. This, I think, was definitely awesome because it just made perfect sense, where it was like, hey, here's your lightsabers. Like, no. And they were joking about it, but realistically, if they had like a normal conversation, the conversation would have been like, I've been here for 10 effing years without a lightsaber. I'm not gonna pick up a lightsaber when I can just use the Force. Like, I'm way more proficient in, I'm sure he fought some of the, the random, samurai bandits or whatever from time to time. And it's just like, okay. Also, sadly, he does not have Kanan's lightsaber. That was one of my theories, and I was like, it's possible that maybe his lightsaber was still on that ship that they actually went in on, because I assumed that was Thrawn's actual ship. And I was like, he had Kanan's lightsaber, and I was kind of hoping, I was like, well, maybe he'll, like he doesn't just have it hanging off his hip, but it could just be like, oh, we're in a fight. Boom, check it out. I got Kanan's blue lightsaber. So we'll see what happens with that. And they could still reveal that. It could still just be like, he thought it was going to be a cool normal day, and then season finale hits and he's like, yeah, actually I had this the whole time, I just never really use it. And we might actually get to see him do like at least a little bit of both. At this point, it makes way more sense that he would be super proficient in like fighting with the Force, because even under normal circumstances, what are you going to use the lightsaber for? It's only attack or defend. Like, you're not going to use the lightsaber to pick stuff up. Like, he's going to be using the Force for like 10 years basically. Makes way more sense that would be the type of fighter that he is, which will definitely help Sabine out, because she needs a lot of help kind of having a better atonement with the Force. And we'll see what happens, because definitely with Ahsoka having already gone through her journey as far as tapping into the not tapping into the dark side, Ezra has, like, that was like one of his whole story arcs, was him like literally teaming up with Darth Maul, sorry. So he's done all of that stuff, so they could definitely have that conversation. I don't know if all of that stuff is going to be happening, in the season finale, but going forward, if they're still doing, like training for Sabine, at least that could be how they kind of help her tap into kind of the sensory style techniques. I thought they were going to do it. It probably won't be happening in the season finale, but the secret technique or whatever that Hu Yang referenced, Zato Each, I thought they were going to teach that to Sabine in the season. But I think they're still saving that for like later on, because at this point, I think we all expect it was like, okay, we got like this many episodes. She's gonna get back into training with Ahsoka, kind of practice a little bit. She's not gonna be that powerful. By the end though, she'll have whatever her classification of like utilization in the Force is gonna be in the finale. And we could still get that where it's like that last minute thing where she, does quick anime power up style. They could do that. And my personal theory, and I've said this a bunch already in my reviews, I think she's going to be a sensory type. And I think, once again, Ezra could easily help her with that, having not actually used his weapons and only used the Force as his weapon for, basically a decade now. He can definitely help her be like, hey, you might not be like powerful as far as Force push and pull and stuff like that, but what if you don't have to do that? You can already fight. You're a Mandalorian. Just use the Force to sense your enemies better so you can do things, excuse me. Just use the Force as a sixth sense, pretty much. So I think that they could still, like I said, just whip that out in the season finale, but I think that's where they're going with it. Also, another part of Ezra not using a lightsaber, why don't they do that more? Just in general, there needs to be, and I've thought this for a super long time actually, it's kind of a part of where people are always like, oh, they always pick old characters and do the same stuff. I would love it if we just had a show or a movie. I feel like it would work better as a show, but if we had a show where it was just someone who happened to have a lightsaber, like they would just be a good fighter, and maybe they could be a bounty hunter or whatever, and they just happen to have a lightsaber because they got it from something, like something happened. They could even be related to Jedi, but never actually trained and just got the weapon from family, whatever. I always thought that would be a cool idea. Like just have someone who just has a lightsaber. Or what if they're, you know, not, they have a lightsaber, but they're better at using the Force, like kind of like how Ezra does it. What if they're just better at like using the Force? What if they're, you know, they do Force push and pull and they don't really use the lightsaber too much because they just don't have that sort of weapon training? Or vice versa, you know, like they have the weapon training, but they didn't get to train in the Force, you know, something like that. That's kind of where Sabine's route is a little bit. But, you know, obviously a different story, but just different levels of how characters can utilize the Force. It's always classic Jedi where it's like, all right, I can use a lightsaber, I can use these forms, and I can use the Force push, I can use the Force pull, I can use a Jedi mind trick if I want to. All the powers, all the time. Like I would love it, kind of like with Ezra. I would love it if we saw more characters that are just like, yeah, I'm just a lot better at like the physical part of the Force. Like I can't tap into the Force. I can't like sense this or sense that. I can do it in like quick bursts. That's why I can Force push. I can Force pull. I'm like a physical side of it, not Sith or anything. Obviously, that's just how they're, you know, kind of alignment with the Force is. I can push or pull stuff, but I'm horrible at like sensing things, you know, stuff like that. I can't call out to people like how Ahsoka actually does with Sabine. It's like, you know, I can't do those sorts of things. I can't do Jedi mind tricks, but I can push you real far. I can pull things in real far. And then that's about it. That's all I got. So I wish they did that more in Star Wars. I wish we got to see that where characters that just don't have the Force have lightsabers. Characters that do have the Force aren't as good at it. It's just like, here's one move that I have, this or that. And Ezra's kind of that character. His thing was always, it's kind of funny. Before this one came out, I was always thinking like Ezra's attunement with the Force being more about animals and stuff. He was never really that physical with the Force. That was always very interesting about his character. His big connection when it came to Force powers was connecting to animals so well. And then this is like, well, he's had 10 years to train on the physical side of that too now. And it's like, oh, that's actually a good upgrade for him. And then he's just utilizing the Force. Obviously, he picked up a blaster like 5 minutes later and, you know, start hitting people. But, you know, the Force was his weapon to get that other weapon. You know, it worked in tandem. The Force isn't everything, so it still counts. But I thought that was cool, and I've always thought that forever, especially watching Ahsoka. I was just like, they talk so much about, you know, gray Jedi and not being Sith, not being Jedi, breaking the whole cycle, all this stuff. And I'm just like, man, it would be really cool if there's just a story of a dude or a woman, I don't care, somebody who's cool. That's really the point. Somebody who's cool that just has a lightsaber, and that's it. They just happen to have a lightsaber. They could just be a random bounty hunter. They could work for the Empire. I mean, it would have to be during a certain time, so maybe they couldn't have a lightsaber then. You know, maybe do it now. Like, just, I used to work for the Empire, now I got a lightsaber. You know, whatever. But I just always thought that was cool. If you play the Jedi games, once again, something else great from those games. Jedi Survivor, they have people with like just gargantuan balls, because these are people that just, they're humans and they fight you. And they just, because of the mission of the game, they happen to be around old Jedi temples. They pick up lightsabers eventually in the game. And there's just people fighting a full-on Jedi, and they just have like double-sided lightsabers. Like there's a move where one of the enemies literally spins the lightsaber around their neck. And I'm like, you have to feel so proficient in, I would assume, using a staff to whip out a lightsaber and just be like, you know what? I can just spin this bad boy around my neck like nothing. That's what I want. I want to see that, where a character just is cool, good at using weapons. They got a lightsaber. We should really have that. We should have had that in live action a long time ago. I just think it's unique. But random dream for Star Wars content in my future, I guess. But Ezra no saber, definitely appreciated it. We'll see what happens in the next one. Maybe he will actually have Kanan's lightsaber and be like, I guess I can whip it out just in case, do some deflecting or whatever. But that should be cool. The full teamwork thing, definitely good. Excuse me. Shin alone, we'll see what happens. They're gonna have an argument. Something's gonna happen. She might turn on him. He might just die in general. We'll just have to wait and see. Ahsoka, reach your hand out. She said, I can help you. We'll see what happens. I don't think Shin is gonna go with him no matter what happens as far as Balin is concerned. But I am very curious. I'm super curious what they're gonna do with both their characters, really, because I still have the theory of like, I don't think they continue his story. I think, you know, it's the classic thing. She takes over as the main villain, but she follows his path, but it just becomes a little bit darker. Maybe what he's going towards ends up being darker than he realized, and even though he wants to break the cycle, he's still too much of a Jedi to do it. Then Shin comes in, maybe kills him, classic Sith maneuver, kill the master, and then she gets to follow officially down the path of being like, you know what, I'm just gonna be a Sith. More people need Force lightning as well. Lightning is my favorite power, just as a superpower. Need more dark side users. Force lightning. Just saying, personal opinion. But love the episode. Excuse me. Hate coming off this cold. Thanks for checking this out. I think my eyes literally watering up. Thanks for checking out this review. Would love to know what you guys thought about the episode. And of course, season finale. I hope it's over an hour long. It won't be, but I want to be hopeful. One day they're gonna surprise us with a 2-hour finale. It's gonna be like a classic, like TV Star Wars, like 2-hour finale. They're gonna do it. They have to do it someday. I hope. Maybe next week. I highly doubt it, but we'll see what happens. I hope it's over an hour long for sure, or even at least close to an hour long. This was 40 minutes. I can never remember how long the credits are, but they're basically like 7 minutes worth of credits. So maybe it was like 38 minutes or something like that. But I'm hoping we get like an actual 60 minutes worth of content, or at the very least, even if it was 45 minutes, because there was a couple episodes back where it was like, I guess maybe it was episode 5, because even that wasn't an hour long. But when they just do the shots, it's like, all right, it's just a long shot where I get some story beats, I get the characters. It's like, okay, it feels like you went through a ton. Excuse me, even if it's only been like 10-15 minutes. So hopefully that's what we get going into the finale, even if it's not a super long episode. But I still hope it's a super long episode, because it's the last one and we have no idea what's gonna happen. Fortunately, WGA strikes, they got a tentative deal, so that was really good news recently. So glad that that's happening. I'm sure it'll be like super crazy in like a month or two. It'll be weird how crazy things get when everyone's like flooding back in and be like, hey, we can promote this has happened, I've been doing this, I did that 2 years ago. Like all these movies that we haven't really been able to hear about. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few things happening that like the next month or so is going to be interesting to see, like the change in like media online, because there's going to be a buttload of like TV and movie stuff popping up again. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be really interesting. But one more episode to go. We'd love to know your thoughts on this episode, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it. Of course, theories: who will live, who will die, who will be stuck in this new galaxy, who will go back home to the original galaxy. Lots of questions, lots of things up in the air. What the F is Balin searching for? I think it's going to be good. I feel like it's going to be worth it, because they gave us so much action in this episode. The next one is like, all right, it's going to be slow, but it's going to be really, really good, because it's going to be some crazy reveal. Because it's Star Wars, it could basically be like literally anything. Who knows? But I'm looking forward to it. So I want to know your thoughts on this episode and theories for the season finale. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.
You hungry? I'm hungry. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. You hungry? Yeah, I'm hungry. Like I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Like I'm Shaggy. Man, I'm hungry. Man, I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Yeah, man. You hungry?